Well, there's a big crowd. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see all those faces in the room. So we'll do my standard Alan Kohler session on anabolic steroids. So lots and lots of charts and graphs with only a couple of slides with words. Can I just start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we gather and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. There's the agenda. I won't sort of dwell too much on that page. We'll just dive straight into it. For some time now, I've been talking about how our market's been operating and when it operates best, and it always is best, I think, when it's market-led, and that's been really in the DNA of the way we think about planning our network here in Queensland, and I'm sure that will continue into the future. One of the key things about renewables in particular has been the dynamics of the investment. Initially, it was all about renewable energy targets and certificates, but by the time we got to about 2018, the renewable target was sort of in theory largely done and dusted. But if you have a look on that chart, on that page there about midway through, you can see the boardroom investment commitments. So up until 2018, there was about 32 billion of that 98. So if we sort of deduct one from the other, what's the market been doing? Well, over the last 6 or 7 years, it's been running really quick. By global standards, $66 billion worth of investment commitments across 150, I guess we'll call clean tech projects. And a big chunk of that, of course, has been that increasing number of companies who are in their own way committing to what they need to do on environmental grounds or ESG grounds. In terms of the run of, and by the way, just I missed it on that last slide, 14,000 megawatts on rooftops over that same 6 year window. That's a lot. So we've been one of the fastest running markets in the world, and anyone operating in it and certainly operating a network, they're busy, right? And I'm sure you'll all appreciate that. When you think about our beloved East Coast market, it started in 1998. So when you think about the flow of investment, we had the last of our coal-fired generation commitments in the early 2000s. That was followed by a run of gas turbines, and the renewables you can really see when they hit their straps. Slowed down a little bit over the last couple of years, but that was sort of supplemented by, of course, all the firming and storage, which was starting to become more important over time. And where that investment occurred, if you think about it by region, let me just put the maximum demand of each of the states there on so you just got a relative size. Up until 2019, it was really a southern Australian thing, sort of a lot in Victoria, actually a lot in South Australia given how small it was. And then, of course, in 2020, I turned up to Powerlink, and that's what I'm just kidding. That was just coincidence, but it was around that time when Queensland really started hitting the afterburners. And the thing that worked really well, I think, you had some big industrials who went out and started moving and shaking, on the demand side. We had 3 GOC generators with excellent trading teams who, beat each other up every day in the market, put a lot of pressure on them to get deals done, and they've done really well over a long period of time. And of course, our role at Powerlink was just to make sure things got done. If there were blocks or difficulties with getting those connections done, to think outside the square and do things differently, and I guess that's what we really focused on doing. One of the true aspects, or one of the complexities of what we're dealing with, though, is what we can connect. So this just shows you the connection applications. These are projects where the meter is now really running. When a project is in our application stage, that means we're starting to charge you a lot of money to get those renewable projects done, and you are spending a lot of money yourselves on trying. You are now on that downward coast to financial close. We can probably cope with somewhere between 5 and 18 projects a year. This is what we're dealing with at the moment. So when you think about the number of projects trying to get connected, it is tough at the moment. And we've probably got the biggest connections team in the country by far. You could almost add the other states together and they'd be sort of comparable to what we do. So we're able to process as much as any. But there are limits to what we can do, and that's just a feature of renewable generation all over the world. Not to sort of put too fine a point on it, if you're in the UK right now, the waiting queue on average is 6 years, and in some cases as bad as 12 years to connect your projects once you've completed all your development. In the United States, it's 4 years. You get through our connection process, you're in construction within a month, but we do give you a lot of grief on the way through. All right, industry cost dynamics. Darryl touched on those. I thought I'd do a bit of a deep dive on those for you. First of all, just wanted to give you a sense of why we were thinking what we were thinking in 2022 and why we had to change so quickly. So the lead order time for a 275 kV transformer, when we're standing there doing our network planning in 2022, this is what we could see at that time, the history. And on the strength of that, we figured we'd be able to start to look, through the idea of a 500 kV backbone. Then, of course, the outshots of COVID on supply chains, the advent of the Russia-Ukraine war, and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, all came together all at once, and this is what happened to lead order times. So we're now in a very, very different world for, sort of utility class, 275 kV transformers. If I think about the cost of what they were, back in 2017, they were about $3.5 million a pop. If they went up with the rate of inflation, they'd be about just over $4 million. But this is the lived experience. This is what we're dealing with as an industry. By the way, don't you love the way that thing came? It took me ages to work out how to do that little thing. All right, so in New South Wales, of course, they did have a big playbook on 500 kV networks. The cost of those things have started to move out, and you can see what that's going to mean for the regulatory asset base across the entire state in New South Wales. You can probably get away with that in a big state with the long distances that we've got. We needed to rethink, and as Darryl mentioned, that meant for a whole range of reasons we needed to start dismantling, focusing on central Queensland and trying to get out of that 500 kV world and drop back down into 275 and roll out things like our wide area monitoring, protection and control schemes, dynamic line ratings, whatever we can do, get generation better sited and more accurate, and we still think we can get the job done. It'll be different, but it's possible. One of the other things that's really sort of been, a dynamic in our industry is the unit cost of wind projects. So I'm just going to show you, it's a piece of work I did with the team at Oricon, Paul Gleeson and his team. We were a bit curious as to what had been going on with both wind and transmission connection costs. So Paul and his team they've done the due diligence on about 100,000 megawatts of renewable projects across Australia and New Zealand. They put it into a big data dump, and we got an anonymised centre point each year for over this period of time, and the numbers were just thrown into a standard project finance model, and we let it rip, and there's the number, about $57 a megawatt hour in 2018. Things got better in 2019, and then all of a sudden those impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war, the Inflation Reduction Act, and interest rates changes, as Darryl mentioned earlier, has meant that the cost of wind from top to bottom has doubled over a very short period of time. Now, let me just walk you through the drivers of that. So we're going to start at the nadir. 2019, so around about $45, maybe $50 a megawatt hour for a wind farm. Just consumer price inflation over that period adds 15. Interest rates add another 17. The supply and install of the turbines is 19. Transmission, nothing to see. And actually, look, to be honest, I'm flippant, right? $3.40. Just to be clear, the transmission cost was enough as it was. It's gone up by inflation, and then it's gone up another $3.40 over that. So it's not a great outcome. So as an industry, we do need to go to work and work out how we do these things better, whether it's scale or start to rethink the way we're approaching these projects. If I go on then to solar, it's been a pretty good story. I mean, it's faced a lot of the same dynamics, but we've had better results on technology and supply costs. And of course, I don't need to rattle on too much about lithium batteries. You all know the story there. That's been quite a revelation over the last few years. So we've still got all these renewables coming into the market at variable rates to be sure, but I know there's a bunch of projects that are sort of nearing the next round or next wave of entrants, and that has implications for our coal fleet. Now, at the moment, the simple reality is we are not ready to send our coal fleet off into retirement just yet. We still have got a bit more work to do, certainly us at Powerlink in that central Queensland augmentations and on the generation side as well. But ultimately, there are speed limits to what coal can do. There's economic gravity that they're going to have to deal with, and there's outage rates that are rising. I'll just walk you through what I mean by that. So if you think about the entire fleet of coal, I'm going to show them all in a few seconds, the ones that are gone and the ones that are remaining. Those that have retired already, there's about 11 of them. they retired at an average age on a megawatt weighted basis of 44 years. Here's a spooky thought for you. The remaining fleet's got an average age of 38 years. And you can see there on the left-hand side of that chart, there's a couple that are pretty old, and they are they're at that point where they probably do need to be put out to pasture. And why is that? Well, it's because the Grandad's axe analogy eventually runs out. So I just want to give you this is a fantastic chart from Josh Stable and the team at Energy Edge. On the y-axis, I've got outage rate per annum, and on the x-axis, we've got time. Now, when we built coal-fired power stations back, when I started in the QEC, what did all the design and planning engineers work on? They sort of said, well, back in those days, it was about a 30-year useful life, 120 quarters. When we got into the early 2000s and we were doing mergers and acquisitions. In fact, looking down there at Ross Rolfe, he and I had a crack at one of these. We'd put out a spreadsheet, we'd put 50 years in it with a little acronym underneath it, IBG, YBG, I'll be gone, you'll be gone. Well, actually, we're now here, right? So we're living with these plants and they are approaching this 50 years of age. Now we're going to rack and stack the outage rate of every single generating unit across the NEM over the last 20 years. And that's what it looks like. Now let's take the average of it and put a line through it. And you can see here a very distinct bathtub curve. Now, you remember in the previous slide, and I'll just pick on 3 power stations, one that's very average and 2 that are kind of freaks in a good way. First one, Gladstone, it's bang on the line. Its outage rates are pretty consistent with its age, right? There's nothing spectacular about it. It's an old plant, it's a pensioner, and it's needing a bit of Medicare, so to speak. Here's the world benchmark and the 2 machines that sort of curiously seem to keep defying engineering gravity. In fact, that dotted red line you can see, that's the world benchmark, and it was actually set by Tauranga and Stanwell power stations. They're in the Guinness Book of World Records sequentially over a long period of time. So there are a couple that hang in there well, but most are not. As they're getting older, they're starting to run out of steam. They also have to contend with rooftop solar. The cost of rooftop solar, as you know, has been phenomenal in this country. We're very good at installing. And of course, households, when they put these things on their rooftop, it's a sport in Queensland as to how big you can get them. We now have mini power stations on rooftops. The average installation size this year for households is 12.4 kilowatts. These are big systems going on. And when you think about those take-up rates and add them all together. So Queensland, 53.7% of households have a rooftop PV. That's the world's highest take-up rate of rooftop solar, and all up about 7,000 megawatts just in this state alone. What that means is our baseload market is currently contracting. So if you think about the angle of when all of a sudden we started putting really big rooftop PVs on, it was about 2017. Well, I'm up to 2017 there. It was at that point households were putting on systems that were much bigger than they could consume themselves, and you can see just straight electricity demand minus rooftop solar has meant that we've got this very distinct duck curve happening from rooftop solar alone, and that's meant that the baseload market has been contracting. If the baseload market's contracting and you've got an inflexible plant, you'll get a rising number of negative price events, and this is the average hours over the last handful of years, including Queensland, New South and Victoria, so it's a thing. And each state's roughly the same, by the way. Averaging them didn't make a big difference. It's common across the states. So we've had this coal plant closure schedule for some time. It's a pretty aggressive one over the next we've had 7,000 leave, another 15 or so thousand scheduled to leave over the next 10 to 15 years. We have had that slowdown in generation development. So that's meant that we've had to delay some of those closures, and that has been important on the grounds of security, reliability and pricing. So all those things matter. But those plants, they are getting old, and as an industry we need to keep working hard and making sure that we replace them with the right stuff. So what is the right stuff? Let me sort of walk you through a world of, is it still renewables with those cost structures, or is it sort of coal or gas or some other playbook? So let me just walk you through we're going to do a Electricity Planning 101 lesson together. So we'll start off and we're going to look in particular at that optimal mix between all the various technologies. So let me just start, and we're going to go all the way back to 2005. In 2005, renewables were very expensive, coal was very cheap, and gas was this beautiful, flexible, intermediate and peaking fuel. So if you think about putting the cost of machines into a standard corporate finance or project financing model, that would be the mix of fixed costs between coal, a combined cycle gas turbine, which is capable of doing, sort of intermediate or even base duties if you needed to, and a peaking gas turbine, which might run a couple of nights a week. And then we add in their fuel, and you can see their order flips around pretty quickly. So the coal was really the cheapest on a unit cost basis. And there is this optimal mix, given we've got this periodic demand. And we can slap that into a model and come up with the average cost of the system and the base load price. Average cost being the overall shaped cost of the system, and the base load price, of course, being a flat. So let's go through it. So that's it. Really simple, right? You can all see that very simple chart. You just sort of lines down it. I'm just kidding. We'll go through this nice and slowly. What we're going to do is do the top chart first, then the bottom chart, and then we'll bring it all together at the end. So you all with me? We're in 2005. These are all 2005 numbers, and then we're going to project ourselves back to 2025. Okay, so here we go. On our y-axis, the vertical axis, we've got dollars per kilowatt per annum. So that's the cost. And on the x-axis, we've got runtime or hours exceeded. There's 8,760 hours in a year, so something at 100%, that's pure base load. So first of all, we're going to plot a peaking plant, our gas turbine. So they've got a very, very low level of fixed and sunk costs. They're quite cheap to build, a very small number of people on site, but when you turn them on, they're using pretty expensive gas, so they've got a steep slope. With a combined cycle plant, you're taking the same machine, adding a bit more capital on the ground, but much more efficient use of that fuel. So Swanbank E, for example, combined cycle. And then with the old coal plants back in 2005, really, really heavy fixed costs, lots of people on site, but incredibly cheap fuel. But you can see there's a sweet spot for operations for each of those three technologies. If you're wanting to run flat out, coal was obviously the king. If you're only going to do a couple of nights a week, gas turbine was the cheapest. If you thought you were going to run most days of the week but shut down overnight, then a combined cycle was your weapon of choice. Now we're going to go and do the second slide in that sequence. So if we drop down onto the next slide, there we go, we've got those numbers coming down. Okay, so we've got the same x-axis, which is the hours exceeded, but our y-axis is now megawatts, not dollars. But we can drop them down because we've got the same x-axis, and you can see we've actually been able to transpose onto that line there, which is the low duration curve. So the very highest point there was the hottest half-hour interval in Queensland that year, which is during February, 12:30, middle of the day. The lowest point, because we didn't have rooftop solar back in those days, was 4 a.m. on Christmas morning, and you had every 30-minute period in between. And you can see here we could work out from transposing those lines down how much coal we needed, how much gas, combined cycle and open cycle we needed, including a reserve plant margin. So there's the numbers, there's that framework, nice and simple, right? We can actually automate that, start putting in stochastic outages and so on, and we can actually calculate what those numbers were, and presto, there we go. $47 a megawatt hour system cost, $40 base load price, and those numbers line up pretty well with what the world looked like in 2005. Now let's take the same model, we're going to project it forward to 2025. What's happened? Well, first of all, coal prices. They used to be about somewhere between $50 and $1 a gigajoule, or about 30 or $40 a tonne. And here's what the numbers have done from 2008 out to the forward curves out to the late 2020s, up by a factor of 8 for coal. Now, when we use these numbers in this 2025 scenario, I'm going to take 50% of that price. I'm going to assume we get the biggest discount of all time, and we'll see how that goes. The gas market, we used to be buying at $3 a gigajoule, and we were in a very stable environment until around about mid-2010s, when all of a sudden our gas market exploded. So the bottom light blue there is gas used by gas power generation. The medium blue is mums and dads, small business and industry use. And then the dark blue is our LNG exports. And you can see we had a very mature system that had this 350% growth shock in the space of 3 years. There were always going to be creaks and groans. And in hindsight, too much LNG capacity was built. So that's the capacity, the 6 LNG trains, the squiggles up and down, they're the daily outages of those LNG terminals. And you can see here their production. They've never really been able to run flat out. That meant that there was a link that happened between the international markets and our domestic prices. So we used to buy gas at $3 a gigajoule. In the spot market, it was pretty stable until those exports started, and you can see from that moment on, we linked ourselves to the international prices, which are very volatile. Prices up over 300% for natural gas. So when we take our costs of our 2005 costs, for a coal plant, back in 2005, $37. the combined cycle plant 45, and the peaking plant, I'm only going to focus on its fixed costs, fixed and sunk costs. I'm not too worried about the fuel because we don't run them that hard, right? That's just a peaking moment. You can see if we escalate those dollars into today's dollars, so take 2005 costs, inflate them 20 years, that's what we would expect. Here's what our best estimate is of what it would cost to build those new plants right now with those new price dynamics. So when you rack and stack all the various plant options, on the left-hand side we've got wind and solar, on the right-hand side, gas and coal. Now, it's, wind and solar are obviously, they need to be firm, so let's look at the firming fleet. You can see by taking the mix on the left-hand side, is probably going to outrun that on the right-hand side. So if we drop it, think about what mix we want. We're heading towards about a 50% renewable market share by 2030. So let's dial the clock forward to 2030 on that sort of basis. There's our 2005 numbers, $47 and the 40 base price. You'll remember that one? Yeah, let's inflate that into today's dollars. If everything had just gone at inflation, we'd be in about a $90 system cost and about an $80 baseload market. If we went to coal, if we unwound all our renewables and went down to the world of coal, we'd be at $150 a megawatt hour. If we did gas, it'd be about 153. The path we're on at the moment is about 100. So, is it more expensive than our old stuff? Yes, it is. Is it cheaper than the alternative? Absolutely. Should you be surprised by all of this? Not at all. If there was a cheaper way, the markets would find it. That's the way our entire market is wired. Find the cheaper stuff and go do it. All right, so and you see there that $85 price. Let's have a look out of our model. What's the actual real world saying? Well, there's our estimate of entry costs. Here's the spot price in Queensland over the last 20 odd years. Here's the forward curves at all points in time, as based on supply-demand dynamics. $85 a megawatt hour. Our model's looking pretty good. So the market's pretty much doing what it should be doing, and what does the pipeline look like? Well, this is the amount of kit we've got on the entire East Coast. These red markers here are probably what we need to be aiming for over the next 10 years or so. So there's the gap. What's already committed at the moment? You can see there, sort of closing in those gaps, about $85 billion worth, as we discussed earlier. And here's the stuff in the pipelines, in trying to reach financial close and in the background. The only one that's curious here, from a whole of power system perspective, are the gas turbines. There's not quite enough development activity happening compared to what we think we need on the East Coast. So it got me thinking about why that's the case. So let's do a quick gas turbine 101. So I managed to, while Daryl's sort of been sitting in the chair, I've been able to sit in the corner and just crunch a few numbers so that I'd give it a red hot go a couple of weeks ago. And in fact, the methodology behind this, Ross Rolfe and I sort of pioneered back in one of our former lives. So when people are looking at gas turbines at the moment, they say, oh, the economics are struggling, and I hear so many CEOs say to me, so which model are you using to do your work? And they'll sort of say, I want to be a big power system simulation model. So you can imagine a Plexos and so on. They're very good for averages. They're great for measuring what fuel and price, average prices and so on. They don't do the volatility stuff well. You need a different tool for the task. And the best way to do that is block bootstrapping. So let me talk you through what I'm talking about. So first of all, we'll create a history of spot prices. So let's take the last 9 years. We will water down that big price spike. We'll water it down by 4/5 in our analysis, because we don't want, we don't expect wars to happen every 9 years, but maybe a big geopolitical shock, once every 30 years. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so there's our spot prices. Here's our cap prices in the forward markets. Here's the payouts on those caps. And on the right-hand side, here's our spot gas prices. Now, what we'll do is then bootstrap them. So we're going to I'll just sort of decompose them. So this axis on the vertical one, it's the average spot price each year. On the bottom axis, how much volatility was contained within that average spot price. So let's plot them all. I'll get them up there on the screen. So you can sort of see here where you've got, sort of low average, low volatility, high average, high volatility, and so on. Now what we do is bootstrap it. So we decompose it into monthly time series and start jumbling them up to create 10,000 years of spot prices. Now we're going to run that through a big power system or a big project finance model and shock the hell out of this gas turbine and see if we can make any money out of it. So as we on this vertical axis, we're going to take all those spot prices, jumbled up caps, jumble up gas prices and so on, and run them through a stochastic project finance program. And what we're trying to measure here is gross profit and try and work out how much of we should be hedging. And it's a 240 megawatt plant, as you can see on that bottom axis. Now, when you run it through 10,000 years of spot prices, which has an extreme amount of variation, you can see here that gross profit just rises the more hedging you do, on average. But you've also got to look at, what's a bad day look like. So if you go and pick the P99, the worst 1 percentile of results, you can see there is actually a sweet spot, and it's sort of around about that. There's a little ratio there that calculates, it's called a modified Sharpe ratio. So we know exactly how much we should be hedging this plant with, about 190 megawatts of caps. Now we run it through that project finance model 1,000 times with randomly selected years. So we're going to use about 35,000 years of spot prices to come up with what we think our value is. So plant valuation and equity IRR on that axis, frequency of valuation on the bottom axis. All right, so there's our plant capital cost. It's about 440 million for this particular machine. There's our valuations, midpoint about 12.9%. Get out of here now, you guys go build a gas turbine. It all stacks up. If you need me to come and talk to your boards, happy to in a former life. All right, let me just finish off right now on the I guess the trilemma or the quadlemma. One of the things that I've watched very carefully over the last handful of years is the media count. The number of times in every month that the words transmission, community licence and Powerlink appear. And when you look at it over a period of time, it's a pretty sad story, right? It's 9,000, almost 9,000 stories on a cumulative basis over the last couple of years. When I look at that, I feel very sad. When I want to feel better, I rescale it and put Queensland then I add on New South Wales and Victoria, and I feel happy again. And it reminds me of sort of, where we're at as an industry and what's important and what we need to be thinking of as in our sector, across all of our businesses, the way to think about our market. Now, everyone always knows that trilemma. And I made a career out of writing about policy uncertainty, but I've realised policy uncertainty is actually wrong. Policy is predictable when you look through this lens. So let's start off in 1998. We actually reformed our entire industry on the altar of affordability. We had monopoly industries that were overcharging and it was adversely impacting the economy. From there, we introduced the world's first renewable energy target, 2% scheme, and then of course we had blackouts in Brisbane and Sydney, very severe ones that led to the Somerville inquiry that Darryl was talking about earlier. From there, we ended up expanding our renewable energy target to 20%, and we started going on that path of decarbonisation. We added the rooftop solar PV, and then of course in 2011, the carbon tax was passed. Affordability would soon follow, and the carbon tax was axed. Electricity prices became a white-hot issue, and the AR unleashed themselves on all of the network businesses, routinely cut 8% OPEX and 27% CAPEX out of all the proposals of network businesses across the East Coast. Then we had the Black System event in South Australia. Alan Finkel tried to drag us back towards the centre, and then of course Hazelwood exited, and we had a new affordability issue. From there, we ended up in the sweet spot, that renewable energy super cycle, that moment where wind, solar was so cheap. It was actually below the cost of the marginal coal plants and the marginal gas plants. It looked like all of a sudden the trilemma could be solved. But then, of course, we had COP26 that said we weren't moving fast enough. From that point, we ended up with the Ukraine war, which sent prices through the roof in the wholesale market, particularly coal and gas prices. From there, we ended up with the CIS capacity scheme trying to accelerate activity as renewables started slowing down. From that, we had the 23-24 global supply chain shocks became very clear to all of us, and we all had to start changing the way we were thinking. And now, of course, it's the quadlemma. The moment, the biggest thing that I think is all challenging us is social licence. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a lot of people in the room here today. All those customers of ours have been great supports over the last 5 years. I want to thank you all. Similarly too with our OEMs, and of course there's about 80 Powerlinkians scattered around the room today. It's been a real privilege to lead this organisation and serve Queenslanders. Thanks very much.